Dear participant, let me introduce our first speaker and the chief guest of this program, Professor Suman Chakravarti. Dr. Chakravarti is a professor in Mechanical Engineering Department, IIT Kharagpur, and a recipient of J.C. Bose National Fellow, is bestowed by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. He has been Institute Chair Professor and is currently the Dean of Sponsored Research in Industrial Consultancy. Formerly, he was the head of the School of Medical Science and Technology. His current area of research include microfluidics, nanofluidics, micro-nanoscale chemistry, with the particular focus on the biomedical application, including the diagnostic technology. He has been awarded the Santi Swarup Bhatnagar Prize in 2013, which is the highest scientific award of the Indian government. He has been elected as a Fellow of American Physical Society, Fellow of Royal Society of Chemistry, Fellow of ASME, Fellow of all Indian National Academy of Sciences and Engineering, recipient of Jeet Birla Award and the Science and Indo-US Research Fellowship, Young Scopus Young Scientist Award for high citation in his research in scientific and technical journals, and Young Scientist Award for the various National Academy of Science and Engineering. He has also been the Alexander von Humboldt Fellow and a visiting professor at various leading universities abroad. He has a large volume of impactful publication in top international journals with the citation and the unique expertise in technology development for the underserved population and the community healthcare. With this brief introduction, participant, I would like to invite our chief guest, Professor Sumit Chakravarti, to deliver his talk. Dear sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kishore. And I would like to first upload my presentation and then we'll move forward.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So just let me know as and when the PowerPoint is visible so that I can.
Yes, sir. We can see it, sir. We can see your screen.
Okay, so I will make it full screen, and then we will.
Yes.
I believe that it is now full screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's full screen.
Okay.
Presentation.
So in this talk, I will talk about different perspectives of fluid dynamics which are connected with human health. This perspective is not new, and it has been there starting from the early dawns of advancement of scientific knowledge, but it has all gathered a new momentum as various advanced tools and technologies in fluid mechanics have emerged over the recent times. If we look back into history, in fact, even in the Vedic era, we can identify certain drawings, typically certain schemes and schematics where various anatomical features of human body were presented with the kinds of details which were unimaginable in those days. I would start with certain series of advancements which have taken place from the so-called era of Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci, the famous artist and painter, as he was rightly known for, he was also a master in bringing in fusion of vision, scientific knowledge, and an artist's sensibility in anatomical drawings. So these are some of the drawings which have been developed by him, and he firmly stated, remember, it is an era where understanding of human anatomy was at its infancy, but he firmly stated that heart comprises 4 chambers, human heart, when it was normally believed that it was made of 2 chambers. He was a real pioneer of interdisciplinary science, where his work in diverse fields led him to connect between soil and flesh and rivers and blood vessels. So this is something which connects fluid dynamics across applications, across physics and across scales. William Harvey, in the next century, he was the first known physician to describe completely and in detail the systemic circulation and properties of blood being pumped through the brain and the rest of the body by the heart. His major contribution was that he first showed that valves in the veins, and these were discovered by none other than his own teacher Fabricius. These valves permit the blood to flow only in the direction that it flows in the human body and not in any other direction. So that unidirectional motion ensured by the valves in the human body, that is acting as a lifeline of the circulatory system. And he was the first to postulate the existence of tiny capillaries between arteries and veins. And these are the so-called microcapillaries or microchannels in human body, which were discovered more formally in after his little bit after his death by another scientist, Marcello Malpighi. Now, all of these advancements took place in an era where the even most essential aspects of physiological fluid dynamics were not quite known and understood. The first scientist, and of course a pioneering scientist whose name appears to be in the undergraduate textbook in all fluid mechanics texts, Poisson, or in our typical pronunciation, and it doesn't matter, it depends on how we pronounce, but the person remains the same, the so-called Poiseuille, as we pronounce in our Indian pronunciation. In the early 1800s, he came up with the famous equation or a famous description of the pressure drop as fluid flows through a circular pipe or tube. The whole motivation was to understand the pressure drop as blood flows through human body flow passages. So To understand the most essential aspects of that, he developed a setup which was quite rigorous. Nowadays, it will appear to be primitive if you see the diagram here. But in those days, you have to remember the era where the characterization and the instrumentation was at its infancy. It was absolutely unimaginable how he developed this subject of measuring the pressure drop as a function of flow rate and the viscosity of the fluid. So in that way, he came up with a measurement of pressure drop versus flow rate in a fully developed laminar flow, the so-called Hagen-Poiseuille formulation. Of course, the formulation which he derived based on his experiments was not exactly in the same form as we learned it in the fluid mechanics text these days, but it's all motivated from the same considerations. So this is a pioneering research act which led to the advancement of understanding flows through closed tubes and pipes. But having said that, there was a whole lot of difference that could be recognized between, say, water flow through a circular pipe or a tube and maybe blood flow through arteries and veins. Otto Frank, towards late 1800s and perhaps early 1900s, he first brought out the impact of the elasticity of the large arteries like aorta, common carotid, subclavian and pulmonary arteries and their larger branches, which have elasticity, very discernible elasticity, because they are formed of elastin. And these arteries, therefore, they distend when blood pressure rises during systole and recoil when the blood pressure falls during diastole. So he conceived a physical model where this elasticity of the arteries leads to a net storage in the blood, storage of blood in the aorta and large arteries during systole, which could be modeled as say analogous to electrical capacitor, which the electrical capacitor can hold charge. In this case, the capacitance which comes from the flexibility of the aorta, it could hold the fluid as a mass. But flexibility is not all. If you compare blood vessel flow versus pipe flow, it's not just the flexibility, but the complexity of the network architecture. In the right view graph, you can see an engineering plant where you have large scale pipes, and we imagine from engineering considerations that these are extremely complex networks. However, if we consider blood vessel flow, these kinds of networks are there, but complexity wise enormous. So you can see the capillary network. This is human body microchannels connecting the arterioles and venules. They are not only extremely complex in topology, but this complexity may evolve under certain conditions of disease. For example, during progression of cancer, these capillary channels or blood vessels, new blood vessels are formed, and they get evolved dynamically, and in the process they can sustain the cancer metastasis, which is known as angiogenesis phenomenon, that is the sprouting and advancement of new blood vessels. So in that way, there is a whole lot of, I would say, challenge between or I would say advancement in terms of understanding engineering fluid mechanics and physiological fluid mechanics. So summarily, in physiological fluid mechanics, you have wide ranges of Reynolds number, and that is very much apparent if you look into this hierarchical structure of the blood vessels. You have large arteries, large veins, which are in the macroscopic paradigm, and you easily have turbulent flow. But with complex multiplicity, branching, it all boils down to from the large to the small and the smaller, which are arterioles and venules, and connected by microcapillaries, which I have just discussed. So this multi-scale hierarchical structure is very, very difficult to analyze from the mathematical model considerations. The wall properties of these blood vessels, they are unique and very unusual. The pulsatility of the flow is very unusual and not universal, so you cannot just write a universal sine omega t or cos omega t function to represent the pulsatility of the blood pressure, and it can be extremely different and complex and varying from one human person to another. The rheology of blood itself is very complex, and as I just mentioned, there are personalized variations which makes engineering and physiology very, very different. So if you have an engineering material or an engineering fluid, it will have a particular universal property, but human beings are so different that within different human bodies, the manifestations of the flows will be grossly different. Blood is itself known as a very complex fluid. It has major constituents as the plasma, the red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, which are the cellular components. Out of that, the red blood cell is one of the most challenging entities in terms of well-known influencers of dictating the fluid dynamics in human body. Not because anything else, but because grossly 85% of the cells in human body are RBCs, and 45%, around 45%, it could be less. Under situations, it could be even more. Say you can imagine around, say, on an average 40 to 45%. Volume fraction of blood is the red blood cells, and that volume fraction is known as hematocrit in technical terminology. It is complexity at its best. The non-Newtonian fluid mechanics of blood, as there is formation of cell-free layer, very unique effect known as Farhus-Lindquist effect, and formation of certain structures of red blood cells. I will discuss all these as we move along. So all in all, blood is not a very, very simple fluid to consider, and even the plasma of the blood, which is watery, that also has certain very complex proteins, albumin, globulin, and fibrinogen, which makes the watery component of blood much more deceptive and complex than water itself. So in that way, blood cannot be perceived just as a complex droplet or droplet-like entity. It's a fluid-fluid interface that hallmarks a droplet, but for a vesicle, which is a membrane which is encapsulating a fluid, very similar to blood cell, you can imagine at the best that it could be a complex droplet. Red blood cell is even much more complex than a simple membrane or a vesicle filled with water. It has functionalities of life and unique adaptation beyond mechanical motion. Yeah, so I'm sorry, there was a little bit of interruption, but we will continue. So, all in all, when the red blood cell deforms, it gives rise to certain very important forcing factors that include bending, that include elasticity mediated interactions, that include viscous interactions, and that ensures global volume conservation. So, all in all, if you look into even the mathematical modeling of deformation of red blood cells, you have to consider so many aspects, and each of these aspects you have to understand that they will have certain parameters which are not universal and dependent very much on the challenges stemming out of the interactions between the cell and its surroundings in human body flow passage. So while there are analogies with an elastic membrane with certain bending and even viscous interactions, because it's a viscoelastic material with partly viscous and partly elastic elements, but still it is not a standard viscoelastic engineering material. On the top of that, it has a unique adaptability to modulate its shape. When we come to confinements, we see that red blood cells, which are typically around say 7 microns or so, These red blood cells are when they are pushed through a passage of around 7 micron. So around their sort of lateral extent, these red blood cells will deform and deform to an extent that they will almost look like a bullet. So something which was a biconcave disc can appear to be as deformed as a bullet if the confinement is very strong. But once the red blood cell comes out of that confined passage and enters into an expansion geometry, it relaxes back to its discoid shape. So that is where its elastic properties get manifested. And this unique deformability of red blood cell gives rise to a very unique property known as Farius-Lindquist effect, which was discovered in 1931, but without a detailed explanation of why that happens. So what is that effect? If you have a blood vessel, what we normally expect intuitively, that if you reduce the dimension of the blood vessel, you expect intuitively that the viscosity of the blood should increase. Why the viscosity of the blood should increase? Because when you have a reduced diameter of the blood vessel, the blood vessel will be occupied more by, volumetrically by the red blood cells, and because the red blood cells are the solid type entities, they should intuitively apply more resistance. In reality, that doesn't happen. Why it doesn't happen? There is a unique lift force that you see by the red colored arrows in this diagram. This is due to the unique deformability of the red blood cells that pushes the red blood cells away from the wall. And because of the velocity profile, there is a shear, and that shear tries to induce a force which is trying to put the red blood cells into a direction towards the wall. So in that way, what happens is that there is a balance of these two forces, and this balance of these two forces keeps these red blood cells at an equilibrium position, which is somewhat away from the wall. This wall, the lift force which is induced by the wall due to deformation of the blood cell, is a function of the deformation of the blood cell, which is more severe as the blood cell is subjected to a stronger confinement. In that way, the lift force is more and more imperative as the blood vessel dimension becomes narrower and narrower. And in that way, the cell-free layer which is formed is getting more and more prominent as the channel dimension is reduced. So you can see that from 500 micron to if you reduce the dimension of the tube, in this case the blood vessel, that is, you go from right to left in this graph, you see the relative viscosity of the blood is decreasing, and that is because the cell-free layer, it gets more and more prominent, and primarily the viscous effect in a confined fluidic domain is felt more close to the wall. But if the blood cells are away from the wall, they will actually join the bulk and they will add to the inertia of the flow, and the viscous resistance will be reduced. In that way, the apparent viscosity gets reduced. So whatever remained as a paradox in those days could be resolved by more deep understanding of theoretical fluid mechanics, where the complexity of these blood cells that could be brought into picture. There is also a very strong connection between electric field and blood flow, and this is something which is not very common, because intuitively people may say that, is anybody applying electric field in human body? It's not really like that. So if you imagine the blood vessel, so you will see that, just look at this schematic which is here. You have the endothelial cells. These endothelial cells are lined with, endothelial cells are cells which are lining the walls of the blood vessel, and they have some protein layers known as glycocalyx layer, and these have negative charges. The red blood cells have also charges, and they have similar charges, and that electrostatic repulsion prevents the red blood cells towards adhering to the capillary wall. The red blood cells are propelled towards the venous end of the capillary by the field induced by the voltage drop across the capillary. So why there is a voltage drop across the capillary? You have, see, the wall of the blood vessel is negatively charged. So because the entire blood is electrically neutral, the bulk of the blood will have positive charges, or net positive charges. Of course, it also depends on the RBC. RBCs will have certain net negative charge. So in that way, whatever may be the negative or positive or whatever, conceptually the overall system is electrically neutral. So there will be a charge distribution, and because the surface has some charge, the bulk will have equal and opposite of the net charge, and that charge will flow by virtue of the blood flow that is pumped from one end to the other of the blood vessel. So that means, so now the red blood cells are also moving, right, along with that flow, and this movement creates a circular magnetic field around the capillary wall. This magnetic field induces nitric oxide release from the endothelial cells, and this triggers the relaxation of the musculature, that is, the blood vessel can relax and increase the flow. So such a complex signals transaction in the human body fluid mechanics, where electrical field also can play a very important role, although there is no electric switch inside the human body. This is something which is extremely complex, and people have not studied this so well. Now in engineering, it is not possible that you probe everything in the human body and see what is happening in the human body, because you cannot take human body as a laboratory and do research of what is happening inside blood vessels. But it is very critical to understand that will not only give us understanding of various conditions of health and disease, but also give us certain clues of how, for example, a drug, if it is delivered to human body, how the drug affects the intervention of the disease, how it affects one of the organs or a collection of organs. All these things have, they need to be critically understood, not just as a final outcome whether the patient is getting well or the patient is getting worse, but what is happening as in terms of a mechanism. That is where the scientific understanding comes. Now if you imagine one of the key applications of this scientific understanding, say drug discovery. If you imagine how the drug discovery comes from the science lab to human use, so there is a preclinical trial of drug development which is partly laboratory based and partly animal based. So it may be based on even small animal trials like the rats, guinea pigs, and so on. So that goes on, use a typical cycle of around 7 years, and then human trials say around 7 years. I'm just giving you a ballpark figure. So that makes about say 14 years to which in the Indian scenario, Indian terminology, more than one yuga to actually bring to practice. By that time, the implication of the discovery that impact may be not that critical. For example, say there is a pandemic and the drug discovery process is going on for combating the disease, so that will not become that will not remain that critical once that pandemic phase is phasing out. And that is how I mean we could see that the vaccine research got accelerated during the early stage of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the challenge is that in the biological science domain, there are so many checks and balances that one has to make. They are related to ethical concerns. They are related to the gap between human and animal models, and the lack of similarity between traditional cell culture systems and what you see in real living systems, maybe small animal, large animal, or even humans. But human systems are definitely much different from animal systems. So in that way, different phases of this trials, they have their own challenges. Trialing with animals and humans are linked with so many ethical considerations that you cannot just make a trial just like that. You have to follow a huge amount of protocols, checks and balances. So in that way, it could be of great help if a major part of the research could be done in an engineered platform which mimics the in vivo or living system situations, and then put the rest on some very pinpointed and focused human trials. So that motivates the advancement of microfluidic technology, which converges with tissue engineering tools for developing three-dimensional in vivo-like conditions, that is physiologically mimicking conditions, with reduced rejection rates in clinical trials possible, because in clinical trials there are lots of rejections because the human conditions and the conditions in which they were trialed in labs or small animals, they were different. So that difference could be minimized if human body-like situation is created in an engineered platform. Not only that, you can control the study there with lots of controllable parameters that optimize the development and understand the physics with lots of characterization techniques which you cannot do directly in human body. So this motivated us to fabricate deformable microchannels. Deformable microchannels are there. In fact, the standard PDMS based microchannels are deformable, but they are not really mimicking the human body tissue system. So we started with a material called as gelatin, which is a derivative of collagen, a protein which is abundantly there in human tissues. Well, you cannot do fabrication directly with collagen. So this hydrolyzed form or gelatin, which we used for fabricating microchannels, These have very low modulus of elasticity, and these are highly deformable, and you can make microchannels using this material just like what you can do with soft lithography based technique using PDMS. The fabrication technique can be as simple as what is shown in this diagram. So you have a lumbar puncture needle which is used by doctors for certain purposes in hospital. So you can just get hold of one of those needles which has an outer diameter of around say 250 to 500 micron. You puncture a petri dish using that and put a mold of this gelatin around that needle, and that mold, once it cures and you take away the needle, you will get a hollow material which is just like a deformable microchannel. And what we did is we studied the dynamics of red blood cell clusters in these deformable microchannels. We actuated the flow using a syringe pump in the physiological range, used a Teflon tubing which is just like mimicking of the flexible conduits which is supplying the flow to the microchannel fabricated in the method that I have just shown, and we were studying the flow by the microparticle image velocimetry and tracking the red blood cells by a particle tracking velocimetry, which is a Lagrangian version of the same method. The red blood cells, when they are flowing through a vessel, they have two unique types of motion. One is called as a tumbling motion, which is having a rotational effect, very strong rotational effect, and at a high shear rate, it transits to a tank treading motion, which is more like a steady type of motion. So this tumbling, what you are showing in this, what you are seeing in this view graph, this tumbling to tank treading, this transition of motion of red blood cells is strongly influenced by the flexibility of the blood vessel. So that is something which was not known so well, and in this study, the details are there in the lab on a chip paper which we published in 2018. This is what we could bring out, that how the flexibility of these channels is giving rise to this transition. Now, it's not just the flexibility. As I pointed out at the beginning, the blood vessels have their own complexity in the network structure. So they are complex in terms of their branching and complex in terms of their interior passage with flexibility and circular type of lumen. All these things, it makes extremely challenging to make a fabrication which replicates that. So we started with a fabrication of making a network structure by taking a leaf, just a natural leaf, and then making a mold out of that leaf, and then creating a pattern structure which creates a master pattern like a stamp of that leaf, which you can use repeatedly for molding, say for example, say PDMS in a structure which looks like the network structure of the leaves, in an effort to mimic the natural branched structure of the blood vessels. So in terms of the branching structure, it is quite good, but if you look into the inner geometry, it is not nearly the circular network or the circular geometry that the blood vessel has. So we adhere to the similar structure, but what we did is we graduated to a advancement or a different technique which is known as hydrogel molding technique. So what we did is we took some Tygon tubes which are tubes with small diameters, flexible tubes, and we injected hydrogel material, a gel type of material, and cured that material and flushed that cured gel out of these tubes to make a gel ware. So this is a ware of gel, gel in a solidified form. Then we put this ware gel structure in between two rigid plates, could be glass, could be PDMS, and then we very carefully we flushed out the gel from this so that you have the hollow this structure created. So in that way, you could create biomimetic structures with the hydrogel materials, and in that we studied the dynamics of circulatory tumor cells. Tumor cells that circulate in the blood vessel, in the bloodstream during the advanced stages of cancer progression. So if you see this experimental picture, you can see the blue markers, which are the nucleus of these endothelial cells, and that shows clearly that across the branch structure the endothelial cell linings are formed. And you can also see the green dyes or the green colors, which show the cell-cell tight junction. That means a stabilized endothelial cell junction has been formed, and this could be a good platform of studying the interaction between the circulatory tumor cells and the endothelial cells. But what we intend to study at the end is something which is even more complex than that. For example, angiogenesis. As I told, that during the cancer progression, there is a very peculiar phenomenon that occurs, which I would schematically represent or explain here. So first of all, when there is no progression of the cancer, it is just a healthy, stable blood vessel where you have these endothelial cells lined, these elliptical things. Now, you have this tumor, and around the tumor you have certain growth factors. These growth factors are certain chemicals which stimulate the various mechanisms that promote the growth and advancement. So the growth factor has a high concentration around the tumor and low concentration around the blood vessel, nearby blood vessel. So it creates a concentration gradient, and the blood vessel senses that concentration gradient and leaks the endothelial cell into the extracellular matrix as a response to that gradient. And that is how the the endothelial cells come out and proliferate, and in that way they form a branched network of new blood vessels, and which sort of connect towards the tumor site, and that is how new blood vessels are created. So this mechanism of angiogenesis is primarily governed by a source of this growth factor which is close to the tumor, say sink channel which doesn't which is much away from the tumor, maybe the blood vessel, and this extracellular matrix, which is the matrix which connects the tumor with the nearby blood vessel. So we tried to make a microfluidic model, a computational model where the extracellular matrix is modeled as a porous medium, and the channels and connectors are modeled as the standard micro channels. And we studied the transport of the growth factor, which is the symbol say C as a concentration of the growth factor, and the endothelial cell concentration, which is symbolized by N, and you can see that their coupling is very complex, and one is dependent on the other. And in that way, with this complex computation where we couple the fluid dynamics with the concentration of the growth factor and the endothelial cells, we could come up finally with a mapping of the endothelial cells and how the endothelial cells are getting distributed. And that gives a clear idea of the role of the tumor microenvironment on the angiogenesis. And that, it's very difficult to replicate that in a real, in a engineered chip. But one can, if one understands that it is possible to make a geometry and structure to have something which is very close to what you observe in human physiology. Now finally, once you understand all these mechanisms, partly by physical model, partly by computational model, how do you apply these findings? So this is an example of a targeted drug delivery which is assisted by magnetic nanoparticles. So magnetic nanoparticle assisted targeted drug delivery is very, very important. Why it is important? Because magnetic nanoparticles can be loaded with drugs, they can be drug carriers, and by magnetic field, these may be focused towards the walls of the microchannel, and in that way, what happens is that these can penetrate the extracellular matrix and get targeted towards the sites, the disease sites, where you have these tumors or certain disease locations where the drug has to be targeted. So in reality, there are lots of challenges, and the challenges are primarily there because these particles, they go close to the wall, but it is very difficult to really have a control on the mechanism by which these nanoparticles will penetrate the wall and enter into the extracellular matrix. So how to increase that penetration? You cannot have a rigid microfluidic network to understand the mechanism of this particle capturing and penetration, which is primarily because of a balance of the magnetic force which is driving the particles in the transverse direction and the viscous drag which is driving them along the axis of the channel. So more the magnetic force impact, it will take these particles close to the wall, but once it gets close to the wall, there is no guarantee that it penetrates and gets targeted towards the diseased site. So to understand that mechanism, we developed again a hydrogel based tissue phantom network, lab on a chip, for targeting magnetic nanoparticles, where by altering the cross-linking density of the hydrogel, we could alter average mesh size, pore size, porosity, and in that way try to mimic various real tissues, because in physiology literature there is a one-to-one mapping between the gel structure and what you call as the physiological tissue structure. With that, we did some experiments and figured out, so you can see the gray region is the wall, and initially the wall is not deformed, but as the fluid flow is taking place, you can see the wall is getting deformed, and there is a interplay between the deformation and the transport, which is influencing the penetration of these magnetically loaded particles, and we could see clearly decipher the mechanism by which these particles could be directed. There is an entirely different paradigm of physiological fluid dynamics, where you focus more on not biomimicking physiology, but using lab on a chip, or in particular, because we were talking about blood on a chip, or even more simpler device, blood on a piece of paper, to study various diseases, that is doing medical diagnostics on a paper strip. So one of the most fundamental insights of that is the mechanism of transport of blood. So blood, if you just dispense a drop of blood on paper, you will see that of course you see it spread diffusively if you look into it macroscopically, but it is not as simple as diffusion of say water, because the red blood cells are there and they aggregate in the pores of the common filter papers which are used for medical diagnostic applications. So we tried to do some experiments on blood with dry filter paper and in controlled lab environment with a very high relative humidity, so that evaporation is not strong, and about 20 microliters of blood were simply dispensed on a filter paper, and we captured the video of it spreading by DSLR camera, and tried to make an analysis of the radius of the spreading as a function of time. And we found that irrespective of the volume fraction of the red blood cells or hematocrit, you can clearly see that on an average, they are all in the same band. That means the blood has a universal spreading characteristics on a particular paper, while the spreading characteristics are different for plasma and water. So clearly you have three distinct bands. One is water, another is plasma, another is whole blood. And this is because of the unique role of the red blood cells in whole blood, unique role of the plasma proteins as a network in the plasma, and water doesn't have any of these. So this is a very important scientific finding, and this gave us an extremely important insight that what is the uniqueness of spreading of whole blood in a paper matrix as different from water and plasma. And we came up with a universal picture of diffusivity by noting that about 50% of the blood flow is blocked by the red blood cells in the capillary in the cellulose matrices of the paper, irrespective of the hematocrit, the volume fraction of blood cells from 30 to 40. If we varied the range in 45, we found it to be the same. Now, a more interesting phenomenon is that instead of a dry paper, if you have a paper soaked with another fluid, say anhydrous glycerol, which is like typically the glycerin that you can get as a commercial entity. So you can do this experiment even at your home, even if you are having no access to lab. So you take a small piece of say a filter paper or a handmade paper, you soak it with glycerin. You may not, you need not do experiment with say real blood. You can do say there are several blood mimicking fluids, or you can put some small say polystyrene particles in water and put some color, say red color as a dye or whatever color which is easy to visualize, and there are certain fluids which have density wise similarity with blood, like xanthan gum. So you don't have to really work with blood as a physiological fluid, but you can do with artificial fluids and just dispense a drop of around say 10 to 20 microliter. You see the blood spreading, and once it is spreading, it so this is the experiment. You finger prick. It's not that you have to do it, but if it is done, a drop of blood will come out. It will spread on paper, and then what will happen is that it will spread it. It will spread to an extent that it will create about a structure which is very much similar to finger-like pattern. So this is if the blood spreads on a paper spontaneously. This is known as fingering instability. That is, if say less viscous fluid, in this case blood, displaces a more viscous fluid like glycerol, it can create a pattern, and this pattern can be a unique mapping of what are the constituents of blood. This pattern is lost if you sort of constrain the blood to flow through a micro channel on a paper, where instead of a random flow you have a directed flow, and that is of course another topic which I will not delve deep into. But you can make micro channels on paper in a very simple technology with a simple printing, with the toner particles coming out of the printer. If you just heat them and they melt and block the pores, you have this black hydrophobic barrier, so that if you dispense blood by capillary action, it will move to a location where there are certain reactions and color change, and you can study the change of color to give a diagnostic recommendation about, say, for example, the blood sugar, hemoglobin, and several other factors. So that is one way of studying blood motion on paper, and another is just allowing it to diffusively spread. So all in all, blood on a simple piece of paper appears to be simple, but it is extremely complex, and the fluid dynamics of that is not as advanced as compared to the understanding of how these applications can be directed for medical diagnostics. There are paper strip based diagnostic devices available in the market, and people use these. For example, the rapid antigen kits which are being used are also paper strip based kits. The home blood sugar tests, etc. There are so many other home pregnancy based test kits. All these are the paper strip based kits which have come to commercial practice, but these kits have come with lots of good trials and errors, but the complexity of fluid mechanics that goes into that, even we are not even very close to understanding that. So all in all, there is a huge amount of complexity that gets into understanding of physiological fluid dynamics, and if we can understand that well, we can have a fantasy coming into reality, a human body model on a chip, not just looking like a sort of a connective structure that connects various organ mimicking small modules like lung, heart, kidney, liver, gut, like that, but both structurally and functionally mimicking. That means flexible network structure, and in terms of their physiological flows, very much similar to what blood flows we have in human body. So in that way, if we want to study the side effect of a drug or a physiological response to any stimulus, we can have a human body model on a chip and try to make some control study of both experimental and maybe computational also, although computation is very challenging in these real scenarios, but at least experiment complemented or supplemented with some computation, and these computations are very much more complicated and advanced as compared to the traditional CFD. So all in all, this can give rise to an engineered platform where it's much more futuristic. At present, we have human body on a chip, which is not so much of advanced as the concept that I'm talking about. But if we advance from the present state of the art to that scenario, then it can give rise to a human body replicated scenario on an artificially engineered system. And that is the vision, that is the direction in which one of the very important foundations of fluid dynamics research is advancing. So to summarize, physiological flows are very complex, and the complexity of blood flow in physiological pathways makes it extremely challenging, and fabrication and characterization of these kinds of flows in engineering devices. The first disclaimer that we have to understand is that human body is so complex that we cannot really mimic it. What we can do is, we can go, something, close to that, and try to get a sort of an inspiration from the real physiological system and develop lab on a chip platforms, which is called as a biomimetic, in a way that not really replicative but mimetic, and then this can be used to study the effects of electric field, magnetic field, etc. in human body transport, which is very difficult to study within human body. The lab on a chip platforms, where we can do medical diagnostics, like the porous platforms like paper, etc. The complexity of blood as a fluid, and the complexity of the paper matrix, etc. This combination can give rise to certain diagnostic indicators, which can lead to even say reagent-free diagnostic paradigms, and therefore there are clearly two important directions of advancement. One is to have a better understanding of the physiological processes, and second is to do better medical diagnostics and more accurate diagnostics in simple paper strips, and then perhaps converge these two to develop a new paradigm of biomimetic human body on a chip, where there has to be an additional aspect which I have not mentioned so much, that is a variation from one person to the other. That is, if I have a disease and someone from you have another disease, broadly they may be the same disease, broadly we may have similar properties of our tissues and blood, etc. But there has to be a individualistic patient-wise variation, and that can be sort of collected and synthesized in terms of doing some patient-specific imaging and doing some classification based on machine learning and artificial intelligence, and then combining at that data-driven aspect with the physics-based learning that we have from this fluid dynamics-based model, in vitro or engineered model, and we can combine that data-driven AI ML with the physics-based model to have a physics-based combined data-driven and physics-based approach towards real fantasy coming into reality, where we will have human body, real human body mimicked in an artificially engineered chip. Thank you all very much for listening to this talk. I would like to acknowledge my various teammates in the forms of faculty members from our institute as well as other institutes, my former PhD students, and who are placed at different locations as independent researchers, postdoctoral fellow, and the present PhD students who have contributed collectively towards working on these topics. And it clearly shows that this is a direction of research which can give exciting avenues of fluid dynamics, which can open up the solutions to various puzzles and mysteries in human body fluid mechanics that remain to be understood. Thank you very much, and I would like to conclude my talk here, and maybe take a couple of questions before we can close this particular session.
Thank you, sir. This was really a very insightful talk, and you in fact posed the multidisciplinary, the challenges where the fluid mechanics and the advanced technology can go ahead with mimicking the total human body system in an artificial way. So participants, we are open for the questions. Please share your doubts with Professor Suman Chakravarty. Go ahead and mute your mic and share whatever you would like to ask.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, hello.
Please
Yeah,
introduce
sir.
yourself briefly and
I am Gaurav. Hello, sir. I am Gaurav Kumar from Delhi Technological University.
Yeah, hello, Gaurav.
Yes, sir. Sir, I want to ask a question that in fluid flow in this micro channels, you model this fluid flow by finite volume method or lattice-Boltzmann method?
So it all depends on what is your objective. If your objective is a continuum model, so you can you can still do the finite volume or the finite elements modeling, but with certain adaptations. For example, the angiogenesis model I presented, that's a finite elements model, very similar to finite volume. So the Navier-Stokes equation with a porous medium approach, along with you have to have a coupling with other species transport of the physiological entities, like in that case endothelial cell or growth factors. So that you can do, but there you have an input which is the rheology of the blood. But if that itself is not quite well known, you have to do a multi-scale model where you resolve the cellular entities in blood, and then you have to go for these particle-based models. So lattice-Boltzmann or these types of models. So it all depends on what you want to resolve. If you want to resolve the particulate features of blood flow to understand the rheology, then continuum model is not sufficient. You have to go for a particle-based model, not necessarily lattice-Boltzmann. It could be other models. You could also have immersed boundary or several other types of models where you can infuse particle-based features. But lattice-Boltzmann appears to be one of the more commonly used ones. So all in all, the modeling depends on what is the scale and what is the physics that you want to capture. So some aspects you can of course do with the finite volume or finite element. In some aspects you may have to connect that with the particle-based model.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Gaurav. Any other question? Participant, please share. Hello. Participant, please raise your hand and share your questions. Sir, hello.
Yes, yes.
Sir, I would like to ask one question. Yeah, please introduce yourself and go ahead with the question.
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
So I'm wondering, sir, what are the applications we can use, like leaf-based microfluidic device, fabrication of the leaf-based leaf structure microfluidic device?
See,
what are the applications?
See, the application I have clearly shown. See, you have the network of blood vessels in the human body. Like you just imagine the lungs. So you have just imagine the respiratory system. Okay. So the air enters through your nostril. Then you have the trachea. Then you have the bronchus, and you have the bronchiole, and then the alveoli. So you have the very fine large vessel branching into smaller and smaller structures, and then culminating into the alveoli, which is the sac type of structure. So in that, the branch structure that you have these bronchioles and so on, they have a natural branching and they follow a particular branching law. This is the beauty of nature. That branching law is very similar to the branching that you have in this leaf structure or the plant branching and so on. So in that way, if you want to see what is the impact of that branching, till now people have been mostly doing it by CFD. That means doing developing a branched network by mesh generation and then studying fluid flow around that. You will see lots of papers, but you can fabricate such a branch also. Where you have large number of that the channels or branches, and then you can study the physically what is happening, and then maybe have a CFD model
here. How can we drag that outlet from this all small finite capillaries, whatever we get? Okay, So from there, we have to connect everything to the outlet, right, sir? So
it
will
is
it
not
be
not that difficult as you imagine. So because I mean, if you see a micro channel, so you have a pressure driven flow in a micro channel. So if you have a say a syringe pump which is creating a pressure gradient, so at the inlet you have a high pressure, and at the outlet you have atmospheric pressure. So by that pressure gradient itself, the flow will be driven by individual branches. You don't have to really do anything.
okay? Okay, thank you, sir.
Hello. Yeah,
Yes.
Professor Shyam, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, sir. My name is Shyam Sundar. I am assistant professor in BITS Pilani, and I have attended your talks here as well as in numerous conferences, and today's talk also. My question is, how do you get ideas about such a diverse variety of works you are doing? How do you plan your experiments? In fact, numerical simulations. So can you guide us? The
No, I
young
will tell you one
researchers.
thing. I mean, see, uh, so let me tell you, very, very frankly and openly. So the first disclaimer is I am not a medical expert or a doctor. This is the first thing. So how should I get these ideas? One possibility is that I can read literature, but reading is extremely challenging because you will be absolutely clueless if you study say physiology or medical literature, because that is written in a particular language in a particular way in which physicists or engineers are not much familiar. So what I keep on doing, this is very important in interdisciplinary research, is I keep on interacting with experts in those fields and try to get an overview of what are the most important critical challenges or bottlenecks in their field. So if you talk with say a cardiologist, say sort of a cardiologist who is research minded cardiologist, you will understand that they are doing say angiogram, and they are getting some information, but what is that which comes into their wish list, but they are not able to get that information by the standard medical imaging and other diagnostic procedures that are currently happening. Now that's all. Then you have to stop interacting with them, because more they say or more you hear to them, it will create more confusion, because not that they are telling wrong things, but we are not trained in that particular domain with those terminologies. So then with that essential insight, you try to link the foundations of your subject, which in this case is still the fluid mechanics. And that is why I say that fluid mechanics as a foundation subject is very, very critical. You try to link that with what they are expecting, and in that way try to develop an imagination where you have computational model, physical model. Physical model means experimental model, not not a human model, an experimental artificial model, which will try to advance that understanding to a new level. Not that it can solve the entire problem, but it can step one step forward. And once you have that imagination, then you try to sort of implement that one after the other. For example, if you want to study say blood flow in a deformable channel, see I try to present you that with that very sequence in which we did in our own lab. So first we fabricated a deformable micro channel with gelatin, in which we did not study blood. We started with simple water, then blood mimicking engineered fluid, and then blood. And then from one channel we migrated into a complex network of channels. So step by step, starting from engineering simplicity to engineering complexity, and each complexity adds to the dimension which will make us move closer to the physiological thing. That is how you can simplify the medical world to bring it closer to the realm of the engineering world.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It really helps, because when we start our career, we are faced with huge literature and how to proceed.
That is what is always there, but I would always sort of impress upon you and motivate you to do something. What we in Hindi we say thoda hatke. That means somewhat different from everybody what is doing fluid mechanics. So everybody is publishing papers. See, here there are so many faculty members I'm sure all of them have done their PhD, or some may not have done, but almost all of them, because nowadays almost all faculty members enter into faculty career with their PhD. Not in an old era where people used to enter into even the as a faculty career with just undergraduate or master's experience. But all in all, whatever you have done, you will see that there is always an inner tendency to go by a easy shortcut way. That you have learned something, in most of the cases you have a tool which you have learned and experienced, and you want to milk that tool like how milkmen milk a cow. So milk that tool to an extent that you can generate results and produce papers, and that is where impact of research is lost. So do not imagine that impact of research is directly proportional to the number of papers that you publish. It is definitely related, not that it is unrelated, but the next question is, what is the impact of those papers? Are they adding to the trash that you and perhaps your students and friends have only read and nobody else cares to read, and it just builds up your career as a so you have promotion from assistant to associate to full professor, and that is where it is required and nowhere else, or it is adding seriously to the knowledge base and advancing research to an extent that it benefits the research and the mankind. So if the latter be the case, that is where you can create a little bit of dent with whatever research you are doing, and that is what is impact. And I would try to motivate all of you to go for that impact rather than the cheap short-term goal of publishing papers out of what you know, which may be completely disconnected from what is needed in terms of the practical technology or scientific know-how.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is actually the concern, sir. It's, in fact, I would like to introduce, we as a fluid mechanics, I feel somewhere we are lagging with the training to actually touch this, particularly the multidisciplinary area in the biofluid mechanics.
No,
We
bio
struggle
is
with
fine. Bio is more,
terminology.
yeah, bio is a bit more challenging and difficult. But there are other applications, even other industrial applications in fluid mechanics, which are not as challenging, but they will also require a lot of practical understanding. Say, for example, lots of process modeling. Say emulsion flow, oil recovery. These are not really, not really as complex as biological processes, but they are not as straightforward as the traditional CFD mode.
Right. So participants, more doubt? Anyone more want to interact with Professor Chakravarti? Hello, sir. I have one doubt, sir. You talked about this, the human model and the complete chain. What I believe is in my understanding, the valves are the major thing which actually direct the flow in one particular direction. And whenever the wall in our artery or veins coming, I feel the flow will not be so simple as we try to understand using the
walls are very important, and that is why understanding the role of the deformability of the wall is very important. In fluid mechanics, the broad subject which covers this is known as fluid structure interaction, and whatever CFD that all of you are familiar with, it has nowadays a fluid structure interaction module, whatever package or open source, whatever you are using. So you can use that as an initial tool, and then what you can do is, see, that fluid structure interaction will take a elasticity model of the wall, which is very different from what could be there in human body. So you can read the physiology literature, or look into imaging of the walls of the blood vessel, which are available in medical database nowadays, open source database, and try to synthesize that information in form of statistically average data and feed that into your CFD model, and that will ensure that you have a proper accounting of the role of the flexibility of the blood vessel, which is influencing the flow.
So one thing I would like to ask, whenever this valve and the opening of valve is coming, in terms of pure fluid mechanics, do we encounter with turbulence also inside our body, or it's mostly
Very much.
laminar?
No, not mostly laminar. Large arteries, large veins, no, the related flow is turbulent. And whatever happens in micro capillary level, that is extremely laminar, and that is the challenge. So it's multi physics, multi scale, everything.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Thank you. So, speakers, if there is no more question, let's thank our, the participant. If there is no more questions, let's thank our chief guest, Professor Sunil Chakravarti, for this wonderful talk. So, yes, sir, we are all very grateful for this wonderful talk, and most importantly, the research trend which you emphasized about it. I think we all must need to think, and as you said, to approach something, we need to discuss, and then we need to put our own thinking rather than the reading, I guess, and utilize by our
It's more like open-mindedness. That is very
open-mindedness. Correct. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Kishore, and so let me say goodbye and all the best for this program.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor.
Yes,
thank you.
So, participants.